The desert heat shimmered above the sand as the sun crept higher over the low hills surrounding Redwood Sniper School. The morning briefing had drawn every trainee into a tight semicircle, boots planted, rifles slung, sweat already forming beneath their eye pro. Master Sergeant Carter paced slowly in front of them, his voice low and gravelly, the kind that came from 3 decades of dust, smoke, and yelling over rotor blades. He stopped, gestured with a gloved hand toward the ridgeline far across the valley. A steel plate no bigger than a backpack shimmered in the heat haze at the far edge. Carter let the silence stretch before he spoke. That right there is the ghost plate. It's exactly 3500 meters out. If you think you're going to hit it, let me save you the trouble. You won't. Some of the newer candidates shifted, unsure if it was a challenge or a warning. A few of the veterans kept their faces still, eyes narrowing just slightly. Carter smirked. That plate exists for one reason: to teach you that limits matter, that fantasy kills, and that there's a difference between confidence and delusion. Atop a jagged outcrop on the opposite side of the valley, hidden behind sagebrush and a weathered boulder, a figure lay prone, completely still, wrapped in muted tones, face shaded under a cap. She adjusted the cant of her rifle with practiced motion. A custom-built bolt-action rifle rested in her hands, tuned for hyper-distance precision. Wind slivers rustled the creosote. Her breathing slowed. No wasted movement. No second-guessing. Carter kept talking, unaware. This range has broken 100 shooters who thought they were ready. You want to impress someone. Hit your target at 1,200 meters, in the wind, under pressure. That'll save a life. Not fairy tales like this. The sound came not from the shooter, but the target. In the span of one breath, the steel plate exploded. It didn't ring. It cracked. It disintegrated in a bloom of shrapnel and powdered rust. Every head turned. Every rifle came up instinctively, but no shot had been heard. 3 seconds passed. Then the deep, delayed crack of a supersonic round rolled across the valley like distant thunder. It came late, but undeniable, a sonic wave trailing proof of its source. For a second, no one moved. Carter's jaw twitched, his shoulders squared up, but his face had gone pale. He looked past his trainees, past the fragments of steel now scattered like ashes in the dust. He stared at the ridge and muttered, almost too soft to hear, "She's back." The plywood walls of the briefing room shook slightly with the hum of the generators outside. It was 20 Suralar local time on the edge of the Polish border, inside a nondescript forward operating site where the only thing colder than the concrete was the silence between intel drops. Lieutenant Clara Voss stood near the rear, arms crossed, eyes tracking every detail on the wall-mounted map as Sergeant Major Carter walked them through the plan. He kept the tone dry and efficient. Hostage extraction. 3 American assets believed to be held in an abandoned chemical facility outside Lviv. Intel suggested a rogue militia aligned with Russian PMCs was using the location for interrogations. No aerial support due to risk of escalation. In and out by 03:30. Clara said nothing, but the itch at the base of her neck never left. It wasn't the objective. It was the way Carter avoided eye contact when describing the source. To her right, Sergeant Torres adjusted the sling on his suppressed MK-18. Icebox, their medic, quietly double-checked his NAR kit and EpiPens. Griffin, ever the minimalist, cleaned the bolt of his suppressed M40A6 with a calm only snipers seemed to carry. Juno ran a systems check on the drone, whispering to herself as if the bird would listen better that way. Everyone moved with the kind of rhythm born from repetition, not comfort. There was no joking, no one-liners. It was too quiet for that. Carter outlined the infiltration halo jump at 0110 from a C-130 altitude 33,000 feet. They would land 2 clicks outside the target, rendezvous at waypoint Tango, and approach on foot. Voss would have overwatch while Griffin and Torres made entry. Juno would handle comms and eyes in the sky. Icebox stayed close to Point Team in case things went sideways. They rehearsed the movement twice using terrain models before Carter dismissed them. He didn't take questions. In the team's gear-up bay, Clara reviewed her checklist in silence. She wore a tan Cry precision uniform with stripped insignia, her call sign stitched in black thread, Volt. Her rifle, a custom-configured H&K 417 DMR with a Night Force scope and suppressor, sat on a padded bench. She checked her mags by feel, tapped each battery in her comms rig. Field loaded her backup sidearm, a Glock 19 with RMR. Every step was muscle memory. Torres passed her on the way to the rigging station, his voice low. "You ever seen Carter that vague?" Clara shook her head. "Once, Afghanistan. Mission turned sideways. Left 2 teams out there." Torres didn't reply, but the silence said enough. By 0040, the team stood suited and silent beneath the humming cargo bay lights of the C-130. Oxygen masks secured, altimeters double-checked, radios synced on restricted bandwidth. Clara gave one final glance at the mission packet displayed on her wrist-mounted tablet. No updated sat imagery, no drone sweeps, just a grainy photo from 3 days ago. She filed that away. At 0107, the ramp lowered. The green light blinked, and the rush of wind drowned out everything. Clara stepped forward without hesitation. She fell into darkness with the rest of her team, heart steady, the knot in her gut growing tighter the closer they came to the ground. Something felt wrong, but it was too late to stop. And protocol didn't care how you felt once you were wheels up. The drop went smooth. They landed silent in tall grass just after 0140 and moved fast through the tree line, staying low and staggered. No patrols, no lights, no thermal hits on Juno's drone. The facility was dead quiet. The kind that makes your skin feel tight? Clara signaled halt, checked her map, then nodded to Griffin. They stacked on the side entrance at 0217. Torres cut the lock with bolt cutters, and Griffin pushed in, rifle up. Inside, the building smelled of rust and chemical residue, stale but undisturbed. Clara swept right, tracking along a broken conveyor belt. Icebox stayed rear guard. The rooms were empty, not cleared empty. No signs of hostages, no gear, no trash, not even recent tracks. Juno's voice cracked in static, then silence. Clara tapped her comms, switched to backup. Nothing. She felt the cold hit her spine before the first shot landed. Griffin dropped without a sound. A round pierced clean through the side of his neck. Clara shouted, "Contact," pivoted, and fired 2 rounds into a shadow behind piping. Then the building lit up. Automatic fire ripped through the windows. Red lasers danced across every entry point. Whoever they weren't locals, and they knew where to aim. Clara saw Icebox pull Torres behind a tank, return fire, and get hit before he made it flat. Juno ducked near the east hallway, trying to reboot the drone pad. She didn't see the flashbang come through the window. Clara did. She turned just in time to catch the edge of the blast. Her ears rang, and the world shifted. She reached out, pulled Juno back, but blood was already soaking her vest. Clara dragged her behind a bulkhead, pressed her gloved hand to Juno's chest, and fired over her shoulder. Me. The attackers kept distance, using angles that only made sense if they knew the map. Her team was boxed in. Clara grabbed the last of the smoke canisters and fired 2 into the open corridor. She slung her rifle tight, lifted Juno with one arm, and pushed through the haze. Her boots skidded on broken tile. She took a round through the shoulder. Pain exploded through her back. But she kept moving. At the exit, she dropped Juno, who was no longer breathing. She leaned her head down for one breath, then rose without looking back. Clara sprinted into the tree line, used terrain to break angles, dumped her encrypted comms in a shallow creek. The sound of suppressed rounds followed her for 20 more yards. By 0312, she was alone, bleeding. Half her team gone before they fired a full magazine, And she knew with absolute certainty, this wasn't bad intel. This had been a setup from someone inside. She landed at Ramstein Air Base just before 0920, still in her blood-stained uniform, her gear sealed in a black duffel bag marked as evidence. No one greeted her. No debriefing officer. No chaplain. An armed escort brought her straight to a concrete room in the basement level of a secure wing. There was no clock. No phone. Just 2 chairs and a metal table. The first interview lasted 5 hours. They asked why her comms failed, why she changed the exfil route, why she didn't call for air support. She explained, calmly, that there was no signal, that the drone went dead, that her team walked into an ambush with 0 warning. The man across from her wrote everything down and nodded like he was listening, but his eyes stayed flat. She stayed in that room for 3 days. Different voices, same questions. The tone shifted each time. First confusion, then skepticism, then accusation. By day 4, she was moved to medical, where the bullet wound in her shoulder was cleaned, stitched, and photographed. No one asked how she'd survived the escape. No one called her Clara. Not once. On day 6, a uniformed officer delivered a sealed envelope and 3 lines of orders. Her rank was suspended. She was barred from classified facilities pending a formal review. Her weapons certification was frozen, effective immediately. She asked to speak with her JAG. He said nothing, just handed her a pen to sign the receipt and walked away. They moved her to a temp billet on base. Her CAC was restricted to mess hall access only. She couldn't get into her own unit's area without an escort. Colleagues she'd known for years wouldn't meet her eyes. One senior NCO from SOCOM Command brushed past her and muttered something about ghosts getting good men killed. She didn't respond. She just kept walking. The official narrative took shape within 10 days. Someone leaked an internal memo to a defense blog. The title read, "One Survived Critical Errors in Eastern Europe. Op raise alarming questions." Photos of her team surfaced alongside speculative analysis about tactical failure and poor leadership. Clara's name was never mentioned directly, but she was the only one still alive. Within 2 weeks, her Silver Star and Bronze Star with Valor were under review. The Department of the Army suspended her eligibility for re-enlistment, citing conduct under investigation. Her bank account froze briefly after a flagged foreign transaction. Her own back pay for hazard duty was flagged by a system that now saw her as a liability. The worst part wasn't the accusations. It was the silence from the people who should have known better. Her former CO didn't call. Her teammates' families weren't allowed to speak to her. Her email was scrubbed. She walked through the motor pool one afternoon and watched her own Humvee being reissued to someone else. At night, she sat in her bunk with a folder of personal statements she'd written during the first interviews. Not angry, just clear, factual. Every page told the truth, but each day, it felt more like fiction. Eventually, she stopped adding to it. Not because the truth changed, but because no one wanted it anymore. By day 30, she was discharged under honorable conditions, labeled non-deployable due to administrative uncertainty. The phrasing felt like a legal shrug. No court-martial, no conviction, no voice, just gone. She packed her gear alone. No ceremony, no goodbyes. The last thing she saw before stepping off base was her name being removed from the team plaque outside the SOCOM wall, just a clean gap between Griffin and Icebox, like she had never existed at all. The email arrived encrypted and unsigned. It came through a burned account tied to a small security firm Clara had once helped restructure in Jordan. The attachment was a compressed archive labeled simply Shadowfall. Inside were comm logs, satellite timestamps, and payment records. One document listed a name she knew too well, Sergeant Major Nolan Carter. Transaction dates lined up within 48 hours of the Emberfall briefing. There was no question anymore. Someone inside had sold them out. By the time she booked the flight back to the U.S., Clara had already changed her name legally through a civilian identity she'd used in Mozambique. Elaine Rowe, American consultant, cleared for diplomatic travel. No flags on TSA or DHS watch lists. She flew commercial to Denver, then drove east through the Rockies in an unmarked Subaru with out-of-state plates and low-profile tags. She kept her windows clean, her speed legal, and her answers ready if stopped. She reached the high desert near the Colorado-New Mexico border just after 1730. The old sniper training grounds, now called Redwood Range, were still active. She parked behind a derelict barn 4 miles west of the property line. No surveillance, no patrols, just a few boundary signs and a camera mounted low on a rusted gate. She bypassed the trail cams at night, took the long route up the ridge by foot, and stayed off every known drone grid. Her pack was light but exact. One soft case, matte black, double-stitched. Inside, padded slots held the disassembled parts of a weapon that had no nameplate. The bolt came from a specialist out of Arizona. The barrel had been hand-lathed in Finland. The chassis, ceramic-coated, still bore faint marks from Ukrainian hills. She spread the parts on a poncho liner, sitting cross-legged like she was handling surgical tools. She cleaned each section with a cloth dampened in solvent, inspected threads, checked zero stop on her scope, adjusted tension on the bipod legs. Everything clicked into place with that muted, final confidence only custom weapons ever gave. She attached the suppressor last and etched her thumb slowly across the stock. 5 call signs had been scratched there by hand. Griffin, Toro, Icebox, Juno, Ghost. Wind pushed east at 6 knots. Clara pulled a handheld meter from her vest and confirmed it at 2 elevations. Barometric pressure was falling slightly. She made a note. She didn't trust software, so she charted angles herself on a laminate sheet with a grease pencil. Coriolis offset was minor. Spin drift would factor by a few inches at this range. She adjusted her scope to 34.2 mils elevation and a slight left hold. Then she checked again. At 20:05, the range lights flicked on down below. Carter stood at the front of a trainee group. His voice, faint but clear, reached her position in waves. She stayed prone, motionless behind the scope. Her breathing dropped to 4 counts in hold, 4 out. She didn't flinch when her cheek touched the cold polymer. No tension, no hesitation. She'd waited 3 years, built a new life, gathered truth piece by piece, and now she was here, watching the man who buried her still train, others like it never happened. Her finger rested beside the trigger guard, never touching it, but never far. She didn't need to act yet. Not until it mattered. By 2012, she had adjusted for the last shift in wind. Her scope crosshair was steady on a steel plate barely visible to the human eye. She didn't blink. She didn't move. Clara Voss became stillness itself. The weapon, the earth, the mission. Nothing else existed. Just distance and truth. Waiting. The sky was clear above the range at 2019. A dry breeze pushed from the southwest, carrying dust in slow eddies across the gravel pad where 24 trainees knelt in a half circle. Master Sergeant Carter stood in front of them, sleeves rolled, hands on hips, his voice sharp and sure. Behind him, the distant outline of the ghost plate shimmered in the last traces of light. Carter pointed toward it with a smirk. That's what we call a myth, a steel fairy tale. Some of you heard the legend. Someone once made a shot from that distance. 3500. He turned, pacing slowly. Let me save you time. It's not real. Physics doesn't bend for your ego. That target's there to humble, not inspire. Trainees chuckled. One adjusted his sling. Another squinted downrange through a spotting scope, trying to confirm the plate was even still standing. Most couldn't find it with the naked eye. A few stared blankly, unsure if this was training or theater. Carter kept talking, drawing a line in the sand between discipline and delusion. High above, on the western ridge. Clara Voss exhaled. The breath came slow, trained, controlled. 4 seconds out. Hold. Her heart rate was steady at 42 beats per minute. Wind was holding just under 6 knots, east to west. Her right hand rested against the stock, not gripping, only guiding. The pad of her finger took up slack on the trigger. Her left eye closed. She waited for the wave. Heat shimmer danced across the valley floor, then parted just enough for one clean line of sight. The crosshairs hovered, then settled. One breath. Perfectly timed. Clara fired. The rifle kicked into her shoulder with practiced recoil. The suppressor kept the muzzle report tight and deep. There was no flash, no echo, just the faint metallic shift of parts resetting. Clara followed through, her eye never leaving the scope. On the range, the ghost plate shattered. Not rang, not wobbled. It disintegrated into a spray of steel and dust. Shards spiraled through the air like torn leaves. The impact struck with a violence that defied distance. Trainees flinched back. 2 dropped flat without orders. 1 stood frozen, mouth slightly open. No one had fired. Not from the line. 3 seconds later, the boom arrived. It rolled over the valley like a storm front, low and sharp, the unmistakable signature of a long-range shot. The delay made it worse. It confirmed the impossible. A few trainees instinctively reached for weapons. Others scanned the ridgelines with narrowed eyes. Carter didn't move. He stared at the destroyed target, color draining from his face. His mouth opened, then closed. His voice cracked once, then fell silent. Downrange. Behind the formation, a black SUV had pulled up. Doors opened. Colonel Mason Kells stepped onto the gravel, flanked by 2 aides. He didn't shout. He didn't ask questions. "Hold your positions," Kells said. "No one moves." The entire range froze. Carter turned slowly toward him. The colonel's eyes never left the ridge. Not the trainees. Not the target. Just that one place in the distance where only one person could have been. He tilted his chin slightly, not in salute, but in recognition. Carter's knees didn't buckle, but his stance shifted, like the ground wasn't as steady anymore. No one spoke. No orders were given. Every rifle was still slung. Every heartbeat seemed too loud. And somewhere up on that ridge, Clara Voss closed her left eye again and waited. The steel had fallen. That part was done. But the shot had only been the introduction. Colonel Kells moved without hesitation. From the back of the SUV, his aide handed out a black satchel. Inside were 8 sealed folders, each marked with red tabs and classification stamps. He passed them to senior cadre range instructors, intel officers. The base XO 1 by 1. No words. Just paper and nods. The silence around the range stayed brittle, but something in it shifted. Carter stepped forward, eyes scanning the handoffs, the tightening posture of every staff member around him. His jaw clenched. "What is this?" He snapped toward Kells, voice rising. "You think this is about a ghost story you're buying into?" 2 MPs from the SUV moved behind him. Their hands rested on their sidearms but didn't draw. Kells raised a hand, calm and final. He turned to face Carter directly. "We confirmed the transaction logs, the SATCOM call out of Rzeszów, the burner payout routed through Lagos. It all traces back to you." Carter took 1 step forward, but the MPs closed that space immediately. "Don't do this," Carter hissed. "You don't know what you're setting loose." "You set it loose 3 years ago," Kells said, then nodded. "Take him." As Carter was restrained and turned away from the trainees, Merrick still crouched low behind his rucksack, looked up. He was barely 20, scrawny, sunburned, but sharp-eyed. He asked the only question that mattered. "Who is she?" Kells didn't hesitate. His voice didn't rise, but the weight of it carried. "She's Major Clara Voss, the only survivor of Emberfall." And, for the first time, someone said her name out loud. Not in accusation, not in a file, but in truth. The line hung there in the dry air, and no one argued, no one laughed. Even Carter had gone quiet now, head lowered, jaw tight. The ghost wasn't a legend. She was real, and she had returned. The ceremony was held in a small hangar on the edge of Fort Carson at 18 Mer 0. No press, no public statement, just 2 flags, 20 chairs, and a row of empty boots lined beneath a single white cloth. The only sound before the start was the scrape of dress shoes on concrete and the muted thud of final salutes. General Kells stood at the front, his uniform crisp, his face still lined from weeks of fallout. He called the room to attention and read from a citation that detailed acts of courage, restraint, and survival under betrayal. His voice remained steady as he spoke Clara Voss's full name, her reinstatement to the rank of major, and the awarding of the Distinguished Service Cross. When he turned to her, she didn't hesitate. She stepped forward in her dress blues, uniform newly pressed, ribbons reinstated, badge polished but worn at the corners. Kells placed the medal at her chest with both hands, then stepped back. He asked if she had anything she wanted to say. She nodded once, slow and sure. She faced the room. Her words came quiet, even. I didn't come back for a medal. I didn't come back for a title. I came back because 5 of them didn't. I made them a promise the night before we dropped, that if anything went wrong, I'd make sure it wasn't forgotten. And I don't break promises. Her eyes passed over the faces in the chairs. Some were cadets. Some were command. A few were the families of the fallen. The weight of her voice settled over them not like a burden, but like armor. We wore different patches, she said. Came from different towns, but they were mine. They still are. When she stepped down, no one clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment. Instead, heads dipped, shoulders squared. A kind of respect only known in places where silence says more than words. After the closing salute, the room broke into smaller knots, quiet handshakes, glances that held meaning with no need for explanation. Outside, the wind had picked up just enough to lift dust from the asphalt. Clara stood alone until Merrick approached. He had his dress cap tucked under his arm, his eyes red but steady. She held out a challenge coin. It was old, worn smooth at the edges. She pressed it into his palm without speaking. He looked down, then looked back up, confused. My brother. He carried this. She nodded and said only, he gave it to me that night. Said if he didn't make it back, it belonged to someone who would. They didn't hug. They didn't cry. But Merrick stood a little taller as he walked back toward the others. Later that night, after taps, a small group gathered at the post bar. No formalities, no rank, just a few drinks and an old photo of 6 soldiers taped to the wall behind the counter. When the first round was poured, Clara stood, raised her glass, and looked across the room. This round is on me, until Valhalla. The toast echoed softly, repeated one voice at a time, like a vow spoken through generations. And for the first time in 3 years, Clara Voss wasn't a ghost. She was home. The Emberfall Memorial Training Facility opened its gates quietly, without media or fanfare. A year had passed since Clara Voss took command, now a lieutenant colonel. The name carried weight again, but not the kind that filled headlines. It lived in the details. Discipline in wind calls, silence before the shot, trust built between instructors and students. The place ran on respect, not fear. Morning started at 05:00 sharp. Reveille echoed across the compound, bouncing off the sandstone ridge where her story had turned. Trainees filed into formation, shoulders squared, boots aligned. They didn't know everything about her, but they understood one thing. Here, nothing was handed out. Every inch of skill was earned. The sniper course had changed, more than qualification scores or groupings. Clara rewrote the curriculum around judgment, restraint, and accountability. Targets weren't just steel and paper. They were scenarios designed to ask hard questions: who, when, and why. Not just how. Live-fire drills were longer, quieter, harder. Every round had to mean something. Captain Merrick handled logistics and evaluations. He still carried his brother's coin, now worn flat from use. He taught with precision and spoke with purpose. Trainees looked to him the same way Clara had once looked to Juno. Not for answers, for steadiness. Instructors rotated from across branches, many of them former operators, who now passed on experience with gravity and grace. Clara never missed her morning walk. At 06:15 each day, before the first range opened, she crossed the compound alone and stood before 5 black stone markers near the chapel. Each bore a name, a date, and a carved call sign: Griffin, Toro, Icebox, Juno, Ghost. She laid a single spent cartridge at the base of each polished brass, fired in training the day before. No words, just presence. By 07:00, she was back on the field. Her posture hadn't changed. Straight shoulders, calm hands, boots planted wide like she still felt the recoil. Trainees quieted when she passed, not out of fear, but awareness, like they understood that her presence meant something bigger than rank. One morning, as she watched a pair of cadets struggle through wind corrections, a new recruit approached her hesitantly. He was 19, from Ohio. His hands shook a little when he spoke. "Is it true what they say," he asked, "about the ghost plate?" Clara paused, watching the dust swirl near the edge of the berm. She turned slowly, gave him a look that was both firm and kind. "What exactly do they say?" He swallowed hard. That somebody hit it from over 2 miles out, that no one ever heard the shot coming, that it saved everything. She nodded once, the smallest smile curling in one corner. "It's true enough, but we don't train for legends here. We train for what comes before the shot, and after." He stood straighter. "You still want to learn?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Then get your gear and meet me on lane 5. You've got wind to fight." As he trotted off, a gust pushed across the field, lifting grit into a short spiral before falling away. Clara tilted her head slightly, instinctively gauging its pull. 6 knots, northwest. She adjusted her collar and walked toward the tower, her shadow stretching across gravel and stone. Legacy, for her, wasn't about medals or myths. It lived in each breath before the trigger, in every trainee who chose restraint over bravado, and in every footstep that moved forward, toward the wind, toward the work, toward whatever came next.